It started on a Wednesday, and I remember that clearly, not because anything particularly special happened, but because I had been on my knees in a puddle of cold dishwasher water when the phone rang. I was already at my limit, with the kitchen flooded and a dozen other things unfinished. When I saw it was Michael, I thought maybe he was calling to check in, or to say he was heading home early for once. But no. His voice came through rushed, clipped. Like he was late to a meeting or halfway through parking. "Babe, listen," he started, "I need a favor. Rachel needs help with the baby." That was it. No greeting, no question, just a declaration, help with the baby. I paused, rag in one hand, phone wedged between my shoulder and ear, water soaking into my socks. "What kind of help?" I asked, but I already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. I could hear it in his tone. The assumption, the way he was already 2 steps past asking, already putting this on me like it had been agreed to. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything, but first, if you enjoy stories like this, you want to be part of the 10% viewers who click on the like button. It makes us really happy. If you are yet to subscribe to our channel, kindly support us today by subscribing to this channel. This helps us to bring you more beautiful stories. It will be great to tell us where you are watching us from in the comment section. Now let's get into the details of the story. He launched into a half-explained mess about Rachel's boyfriend leaving, how she was overwhelmed, her apartment too small, and the baby crying all night. I wasn't listening to every word, how could I, with suds creeping toward the baseboards and the scent of damp wood rising like a warning. But I caught the big pieces. He wanted me to take the baby. Not for a day. Not for a weekend. But just until she gets back on her feet. Those words felt like a stone in my gut. They never mean what they sound like. They don't come with a date, or a plan, or a promise. They mean indefinitely. I went quiet, and he filled the silence with that sentence I'd come to resent so deeply: family helps family. It always came when I was about to say no. Always when he needed to guilt me into yes. And before I could even process it, he'd hung up. Just like that, the decision was made. Not by me. To me. Rachel showed up the next morning with bags under her eyes and no baby bag in sight. No diapers, no bottles, no extra clothes. She handed me her daughter like she was returning a borrowed sweater, lightly, casually, with a muttered, "Thank you so much, I seriously need a break." I tried to ask when she'd be back, but she was already turning, keys in hand, halfway down the driveway. And then it was just me and a baby I didn't birth, in a house that hadn't seen a crib in years, and a husband who thought saying the word family absolved him of any further responsibility. I stood in the doorway for a long time, the baby wriggling in my arms, unsure whether to laugh or cry. I ended up doing neither. I just shut the door and got to work, because there was no other option. That was the first time I wondered, how did I become the default? The first few days were a blur. Feedings, burpings, emergency Target runs for formula and wipes. I was up every 3 hours. My back ached from pacing the floors, rocking her while she screamed. I hadn't done this since my cousin's baby years ago, and back then, it was short stints, full of thank yous and backup. This time, I was alone. Michael didn't come home the first weekend. He said Rachel needed him too, that she was barely holding it together. I wanted to scream. She needed help? I was the one taking unpaid leave, the one wiping spit up from my shirt, the one who hadn't slept a full night in 5 days. But every time I tried to bring it up, he'd deflect. "You're so good at this," he said once on the phone. "Better than Rachel. She's a mess right now." As if competence was a trapdoor into more labor. As if my ability to manage chaos was a reason to dump more on me. I started writing things down. Not for fun. Not for memories. But because I knew, deep in my bones, that no one would believe me otherwise. I kept a notebook, the receipts from the hospital when she got a fever, the cost of formula, the daycare application fee I paid so I could take a consulting call without her in the background. Every nap logged. Every diaper tracked. It wasn't just for her. It was evidence. A record. Because when this exploded, and I knew it would, I needed to be able to look back and say, I didn't imagine this. I carried all of it. The hardest part wasn't the exhaustion. It wasn't even the silence from Rachel, who sent breezy text updates but never once said when she planned to come back. It wasn't the lack of help from Michael, or the way he called what I was doing helping, like I was playing house instead of living in constant overwhelm. The hardest part was realizing I was invisible. Useful, but unseen. Reliable, but not respected. Everyone talked around me, what a blessing I was, how kind, how patient, but no one asked how I was. No one asked if I wanted this. And the longer it went on, the more I realized, I didn't just lose my time. I lost my place in my own marriage. But something in me was shifting. Slowly. Quietly. Like a rope being pulled tight before it snaps. Every receipt I logged, every time I reheated my dinner at 10 p.m. while bouncing a baby on my hip, every time I texted Michael with a simple request and got nothing but I'll check, it was all pulling me towards something final. I didn't know what I would do yet. But I knew this, I would not be their babysitter forever. And when I left, I wouldn't go empty-handed. They would get every bottle I bought, every invoice I paid, every hour I gave. And they would understand exactly what it cost to pretend my silence meant consent. The third week hit harder than the first two combined. By then, the novelty of pretending this was just a short-term favor had worn off, and the exhaustion settled into my bones like mold. Slow, creeping, impossible to clean out once it took hold. Every morning started with a whimper, hers, then mine. I stopped checking the time when she woke me at night. What did it matter if it was 1 a.m. or 3 a.m.? My days bled together anyway, all under the same gray light of duty. I didn't shower unless she napped. I didn't eat unless she slept. My life had become a delicate negotiation with a 6-month-old I hadn't asked to raise. I didn't resent her. I resented what she represented. Proof that I could be taken for granted and handed responsibilities that were never mine to begin with. Rachel hadn't called once since she left her here. Not once. Only a few texts, always light, always empty. Hope you're both doing great. You're amazing for this. As if praise was payment. Michael was even worse. He came home twice in that third week. Once to grab clothes. Once to grab his laptop. The first time, I met him at the door with the baby on my hip and dried cereal stuck to my shirt. Can you hold her while I shower? I asked. He looked at me like I'd spoken another language. I can't right now, I'm on a tight deadline. Just came to pick up some stuff. Then he kissed my forehead and walked past me like a ghost. That was when I realized I wasn't even his wife anymore, I was just the live-in help. No updates. No questions. No apology. I watched him move through our home like it didn't belong to both of us, like I was a squatter in the life he built with someone else. And maybe I was. Maybe this version of our life was his ideal, me handling everything, him floating above it all. On the 23rd day, the baby spiked a fever. I panicked. I wasn't even sure I had her medical card. I found it stuffed in the bottom of the bag Rachel had left, crumpled, half-torn, barely legible. I drove to the emergency room gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I remember looking in the rearview mirror at the red, puffy face behind me and thinking, I am not this child's mother. But in that moment, I was all she had. I held her in the waiting room for 3 hours. I rocked her through registration. I answered every question. They asked about her allergies, her medical history, her sleep habits. I answered every single one. And I hated that I could. I hated that I knew more about this baby than her own mother. When the doctor came in and looked at me and said, "Mom, can I talk to you for a second?" I didn't correct him. I couldn't. Because pretending was easier than explaining how I ended up being responsible for a child who wasn't mine, because no one else had stepped up. When we got home, the baby slept. I didn't. I sat on the couch with the hospital paperwork in one hand and my phone in the other. I called Michael first. No answer. I called again. Voicemail. I texted him, ER visit. Fever. We're home now. No reply. I stared at the word we in that message for a long time. We. Who was we? Me and the baby? Me and the life they dumped on me? Then I texted Rachel. She had a fever. Took her to the ER. She's okay now. She responded an hour later, OMG. Poor baby. Thank you so much for taking care of her. You're incredible. That was it. No call. No follow-up. No indication she was coming to take her child home. Just more empty sugar dusted over the bitterness they kept handing me like cake. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with every receipt I'd saved. Formula, diapers, daycare pre-registration, a thermometer, baby Tylenol, the urgent care bill, the hospital copay, 2 new onesies, pacifiers, gas drops. Over $900 in 3 weeks. And that didn't count the lost freelance contract I'd backed out of, or the hours of sleep I'd never get back. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a rant. Not a letter. A ledger. A full, itemized breakdown. I listed dates. Amounts. Timestamps. I didn't know why, exactly. Maybe to keep myself sane. Maybe because I knew, deep down, I was heading towards something irreversible, and when I got there, I didn't want anyone telling me I was being irrational. I wanted proof. And the numbers didn't lie. By the end of the week, something in me had hardened. Not like stone. Like steel. Quiet strength. I stopped pretending I was okay. I stopped hoping Michael would change. I stopped checking for Rachel's name on my phone. I started preparing. Little things. Gathering my own documents. Moving money into a separate account. Calling my old friend Laura, who worked at a law firm, and asking vague questions about temporary guardianship and notarized declarations. She didn't pry. She just said, "Whatever you're planning, make sure it protects you." That hit me harder than she knew. Because for the first time in this entire mess, someone was thinking about what I needed, not what the baby needed, or Rachel, or Michael. Me. I realized then that my problem wasn't just the baby. It was that I had become the safety net for people who refused to walk their own tightropes. Rachel dropped the baby off not because she trusted me, but because she expected me to say yes. Michael left because he knew I'd handle it. Everyone knew I'd say yes. I always had. But not anymore. I was starting to taste the edge of the boundary I hadn't drawn yet. And it was sharp. And clean. And final. I tucked the hospital paperwork into a folder labeled Return to Sender. It wasn't just a joke. It was a plan. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to plead. I was going to hand them the bill, and the baby, and walk away from the entire performance. And when I did, I would not look back. It was around day 30 when I stopped pretending I was doing this out of love. That's not to say I didn't care about the baby. She was innocent in all of this, a tiny thing who clung to my shoulder and looked at me with sleepy trust one didn't ask for but somehow inherited. But love had nothing to do with why I was still here, why I was still waking up at 4:17 a.m. to rock her back to sleep while her mother posted Instagram selfies from rooftop bars and her uncle hadn't so much as restocked the formula shelf in 2 weeks. This wasn't love. This was duty hijacked and repackaged as generosity. This was emotional blackmail dressed up as sacrifice. And I knew if I didn't end it soon, I'd forget how to be anything other than useful. I'd lose myself inside someone else's crisis, just like I had done too many times before. The house had become a museum of half-finished tasks. Dishes sat in the sink. My work laptop hadn't been touched in days. There were sticky notes everywhere. Reminders to pay bills, reschedule appointments, cancel lunch plans I'd never make again. And still, no one checked on me. Rachel sent a picture of her finally smiling again at brunch with friends, captioned, "I owe you so big, sis." Michael left me a voicemail saying he was running on fumes, as if I wasn't running on the same tank, only mine had run dry 3 weeks ago. He talked like he was proud of me, like I was performing well in some invisible game I never signed up to play. I didn't want his praise. I wanted his presence. And more than that, I wanted him to stop pretending this was normal. I remember standing in the baby aisle at Target for the 3rd time that week, cradling a box of wipes against my hip like it was a newborn, and catching my own reflection in the freezer door nearby. I looked like a ghost, hair shoved into a bun, dark circles bruising my face, shirt stained with God knows what. And for a split second, I didn't recognize myself. That was the moment. Right there, under the humming lights and next to a screaming toddler in someone else's cart, I realized I was done. Not tired. Not stressed. Done. Like a switch had flipped inside me, and whatever part of me used to rationalize their behavior had finally shorted out. I put the wipes in the cart and smiled. Not because I was okay, but because I knew what I was going to do. And once I knew, I felt lighter. Back at home, I waited until the baby was asleep to pull out the folder I'd started. I sat at the kitchen table in the one clean spot I had left and started organizing everything: receipts, appointment summaries, text screenshots, copies of emails, daycare inquiries, the hospital bill. I made tabs. I used highlighters. It felt surgical. Detached. Like I wasn't even myself anymore. I was the lawyer of a woman I used to be, building a case to set her free. And at the very back of the folder, I placed a single document, the notarized letter I'd paid a mobile notary to witness just that morning. It was written plainly, no drama. Just facts. I stated I was not the child's legal guardian. That I was relinquishing temporary care. That I expected pickup within 48 hours or the documents would be forwarded to Child Services. It was the kind of letter that didn't scream. It didn't need to. It had teeth. I thought I'd feel guilt while preparing it. But I didn't. I felt calm. Clear. My hands didn't even shake. I left the folder on the dining table and spent the rest of the evening folding the baby's clothes, cleaning her bottles, labeling everything she'd need. Not because I was trying to make things easier for Rachel, but because I wanted to do this clean. No chaos. No confusion. Just a quiet, undeniable end to the role they shoved me into. I even prepared a little gift bag. Soft pink tissue paper, a small stuffed elephant, and a thank you card, blank on the outside, but inside was the letter, the invoices, and a note written in my neatest handwriting: "She's safe, fed, and healthy. But I'm no longer your solution." I didn't text Michael that night. I didn't call Rachel. I just went to bed for the first time in weeks without setting an alarm. The baby still cried at 3:12 a.m., and I got up anyway, because I wasn't cruel. I would never be. But I held her differently this time. Not like I was hers, or like she was mine. I held her like a goodbye. And even though she was too young to understand, I whispered it into her ear anyway. "You're not my burden, baby girl. But I'm not your savior either." By morning, I'd already packed her bag. I dressed her gently, fed her one last bottle, and placed the gift bag by the front door. Michael texted that he and Rachel would swing by around noon. No explanation for the visit. Just a casual, we figured it's time to check in. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Everything I had to say was already waiting for them. And I was finally ready to let silence do the talking. They arrived at 12:07 p.m., late, of course. I'd been sitting in the living room with the baby on my lap, both of us unusually quiet, like we could both feel the shift in the air. I had dressed her in a soft lavender onesie with little white clouds and brushed out her wispy hair, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I just didn't want them to say I didn't take good care of her. Maybe I wanted the room to feel like a closing chapter instead of a crime scene. When the doorbell rang, I didn't rush. I stood up calmly, kissed the top of the baby's head, and walked to the door with the gift bag in one hand, her diaper bag slung over the other. When I opened it, Michael grinned wide, Rachel close behind him, sunglasses still on, holding a smoothie in one hand like she was arriving at brunch. "There's my superwoman," she chirped. "We brought lunch. Thought we could all catch up." I didn't smile. I didn't invite them in. I stepped aside just enough to let them in, then turned and walked straight to the living room. Rachel followed me first, and Michael trailed behind. The baby reached for her aunt instinctively. She recognized her, of course, but even Rachel seemed surprised. "Oh, she's gotten so big," she said, taking her into her arms like this was just a friendly visit, like she hadn't missed a full month of her child's life. Michael sat down across from me and set the takeout bag on the coffee table like we were hosting a reunion. "So," he began, "how's our little trooper doing?" That word, "our," made something cold and final click into place inside me. I reached for the gift bag on the floor beside my chair and held it out. "This is for you," I said simply. Rachel, still bouncing the baby on her knee, looked confused but took it. She pulled out the tissue paper, smiling, until she saw the stack inside. First came the hospital bill, neatly paperclipped to the insurance denial letter because Rachel had let her coverage lapse. Then the daycare invoice, the receipts from the pharmacy, the note from the pediatrician. Her smile faltered. "What is all this?" she asked. Michael leaned forward, suddenly alert. "What's going on?" I didn't answer immediately. I waited until Rachel reached the envelope tucked at the bottom, the notarized letter. She opened it slowly, reading the first few lines before looking up at me, her mouth slightly open. "Is this a joke?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry yet. Just surprised. Confused. That wouldn't last long. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "This is your notice," I said. "You have 48 hours to assume custody. After that, I will contact Child Services and inform them of the abandonment. I am not her legal guardian, and I will not be responsible for her beyond this weekend." Michael stood up. "What the hell is this?" he asked. "Are you serious right now?" I looked at him, not with anger, but with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. "Dead serious. You both decided that I could be the solution. Without asking. Without support. You dropped your responsibilities into my lap and disappeared. You didn't check in. You didn't contribute. You didn't ask how I was doing. And now, I'm done." Rachel's face flushed red. "I thought you loved her," she snapped. "I thought you wanted to help." I shook my head. "I do love her. That's why I kept her safe, fed, healthy. That's why I didn't walk out in the middle of the night like her father did. But loving her doesn't mean I owe you my life. It doesn't mean I put myself through physical and emotional burnout while you take selfies and call it coping." Michael started to interrupt, but I raised a hand. "No. You don't get to speak yet. You told me family helps family. But what you really meant was family sacrifices while you disappear. You abandoned me with her, then acted like I should be grateful for the opportunity. I kept a record of everything. Every receipt, every hour, every moment I gave. And now, I'm returning it all. You're welcome. There was silence after that. Not heavy. Just stunned. Rachel looked down at her daughter, who was now chewing the edge of her shirt, completely unaware of the storm between the adults. Michael looked at the gift bag like it had exploded. I stood up. I'll be out of the house by Monday, I said. You can have it. Clearly, I was the only one treating it like a home anyway. Rachel stood too, suddenly indignant. You're ending your marriage over this? I turned to her, finally letting my voice rise just enough to cut through. No. I'm ending it because this was the last straw. I'm ending it because I've been disappearing slowly for years, this just made it obvious. And now I'm reclaiming what's left of me. I left them in the living room and walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. I could hear them whispering, Rachel asking Michael what to do, Michael saying something about needing to fix this. But I didn't care. Not anymore. For once, the weight of everything wasn't sitting on my shoulders. I had set it down. I had handed it back. And no matter how loud they got, no matter what words they threw at me, I had already spoken the only sentence that mattered, I'm done. I left before the weekend ended. By Sunday night, I had packed 3 suitcases, just the essentials, the pieces of myself I still recognized. I didn't waste time explaining anything further to Michael. I'd already said everything that mattered. He spent the rest of Saturday walking around the house like a man trying to memorize a dream before it vanished. Every time I passed him in the hallway, he looked like he might speak, but he never did. I think he finally understood that nothing he could say would patch the damage. And honestly, it wasn't about one moment. It was the accumulation of them. The little things he overlooked. The big things he dumped on me. The way he'd convinced himself that what I gave him would never run out. And now, with my silence as loud as it had ever been, he was left with something he couldn't interpret. And that scared him more than anger ever would. I moved into a temporary apartment Lara helped me find. It wasn't anything luxurious, just a 1-bedroom with gray carpets and a half-functional dishwasher, but it was quiet. And it was mine. The first night I slept there, I didn't even cry. I expected I might. But instead, I lay on the unfamiliar mattress in the unfamiliar room and exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for years. There was no baby monitor crackling beside me. No phantom cries jerking me awake. No footsteps overhead, no lingering resentment simmering in the silence. It was just me. And peace. And the terrifying, beautiful realization that I had no one to answer to anymore. Not a husband. Not a sister-in-law. Not a role I never chose. Just me. The fallout came fast and loud. Rachel called me 3 times the following week. I didn't pick up. She texted everything from, "Can we please talk like adults," to "You'll regret this." Michael was more subtle. He emailed. He sent me a shared folder with pictures of us from years ago. He attached old love notes I'd written, screenshots of inside jokes we used to share. I didn't respond. Because I had already lived those moments, and I knew exactly when they ended. Nostalgia is a weapon when wielded by people who want to trap you in your own history. But I had no intention of being lured back by memories they hadn't earned the right to evoke anymore. Love without accountability is just manipulation wrapped in flowers and old photographs. I started therapy that second week. I told the therapist everything, how I'd lost track of my own needs, how I'd mistaken silence for peace, how being the strong one had become a prison sentence. She didn't offer pity. She offered clarity. "You were never his partner," she said once, gently. "You were his foundation. He built himself on top of you, assuming you'd never crack." That sentence haunted me for days. Because it was true. I had carried him, and Rachel, and their chaos. And when I finally stopped, they were shocked. Like I'd changed the rules of a game they thought I was too tired to quit. I spent my mornings walking. No destination. Just movement. I found a coffee shop 3 blocks away and made it my daily ritual: coffee, quiet, then a walk back. The barista learned my name. The older woman at the window table started waving to me. I began to feel like a person again, not just a placeholder in someone else's life. I remembered what it felt like to choose my own food, my own music, my own pace. And the more I reclaimed, the less I missed what I'd left behind. Some people would call it selfish. But I called it survival. Because when you're drowning, the first breath of air doesn't feel selfish, it feels sacred. Michael showed up once. Outside the apartment. He didn't knock. Just stood there, waiting. I saw him through the peephole, standing with his hands in his pockets like a teenager who'd skipped curfew. I watched him for a full minute before turning away. He waited another 20 before leaving. That was the closure he never got. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I'd already given him more words than he deserved. Sometimes the best answer is none. Sometimes the most powerful boundary is silence. Especially when your whole life, you were taught to explain your pain so others could feel comfortable around it. I didn't hate him. That surprised me. I thought maybe I would. But what I felt was smaller, colder, more distant. Indifference. Not because he didn't matter, but because I no longer needed him to. I'd stopped orbiting around his needs. I had stepped off the spinning carousel and planted my feet somewhere steady. The freedom wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet. Soft. Like slipping off a too heavy coat after winter. You don't scream. You just breathe deeper. I kept the letter. The one I'd given Rachel. I made a copy and tucked it into my journal. Not as a threat, not even as evidence, but as a reminder. That I had drawn a line once, and I could do it again if I had to. That I was capable of walking away from things that didn't serve me. That I was no longer the woman who waited to be asked before she snapped. I had spoken. I had acted. And I had survived it. Some people think closure comes with a conversation. A tearful sit-down, an apology, a promise to do better. But that's not how it happened for me. There were no final arguments. No flowers at my door. No epiphany text from Michael, no late-night voicemail from Rachel crying into the phone. Instead, closure came slowly, like the sun rising over something scorched. Quiet. Relentless. Soft at first, and then undeniable. It didn't ask permission. It just arrived. And it brought with it the understanding that I didn't need to forgive them in order to free myself. I just needed to stop waiting for someone to validate what I already knew deep in my bones: I had been used. And I was done letting that be my normal. It's strange what you start to notice when you finally step outside the fog. The little things I once dismissed suddenly stood out like red flags I had tripped over 100 times. The way Michael would thank me for doing things he should have been doing himself, like I was earning stars on a chart he never had to fill out. The way Rachel only called me a blessing when she needed something, but disappeared whenever I asked for help. The way they both used language like a leash: "You're so good at this, we trust you, you're the only one who understands." It had never been praise. It had been a strategy. To keep me in place. To keep me quiet. And I had mistaken it for love. But I don't regret the care I gave the baby. Not for a second. She was never the problem. She was the one true thing in all of it, an innocent, confused little girl who needed warmth and calm and someone to hold her when the world got loud. I gave her that. And even now, as the days stretch on and she's back with her mother, I still think about her sometimes. I wonder if she remembers the songs I hummed, the way I cradled her in the crook of my arm, the rhythm of our days. I hope some part of her does. And I hope Rachel has stepped up, because I meant what I said. I was done. But that didn't mean I wanted her child to suffer. It just meant I finally chose to stop suffering for everyone else. I still get the occasional text from Michael. Usually short. Thinking about you. Hope you're okay. Once, he sent "You were right," with no follow-up. I never reply. Not because I'm cruel, but because the time for explanations ended the day I walked out that door. Sometimes people don't deserve access to the healed version of you after they ignored the broken one for so long. And I had spent years being accessible. Available. Accountable. I'd earned my silence. I wore it like armor now. Not to shut the world out, but to protect the world I was building for myself inside it. Therapy helped. So did time. I learned that boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. And you get to choose who walks through them. You get to decide what love looks like, what respect feels like, what your limits are. And no one, not even people who share your last name, are entitled to ignore that. Just because you're capable doesn't mean you have to carry everything. Just because you're loving doesn't mean you have to be selfless to the point of collapse. I am not bitter. I am clear. I am not broken. I am built anew. With stronger foundations. With better locks on my doors. I got a new job 2 months after I left. It's quiet work, flexible hours, and I take meetings from my own desk, coffee in hand, dog curled at my feet. My place is small but peaceful. No baby monitors. No screaming matches. Just plants I keep forgetting to water and a playlist that plays too loud while I cook dinner. And I smile now. Not because everything is perfect. But because I know, every night, that I am safe in a life I chose for myself. Sometimes, I think back to that moment when Rachel handed me the baby without a second thought. How casually she'd offloaded her world into mine. And how easily Michael had vanished behind excuses and obligations. And I'm proud, not because I stayed, but because I left. Proud because I didn't burn it all down in rage, I handed it back in quiet defiance. With receipts. With grace. With a spine they never expected me to grow. Let them tell the story however they need to. Let them call me ungrateful or dramatic or cold. The truth is, I gave more than they ever deserved. And when I stopped, they saw it not as justice, but betrayal. That says more about them than it ever did about me. I'm no longer their helper. I'm no longer the buffer between their mess and their consequences. I am simply gone. And in my absence, I hope they learn what presence really means. If you've ever been the one everyone counts on, until you finally break, then you know how heavy quiet resentment can feel. I chose peace over pleasing, and I don't regret it. If this story hit home, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs the strength to walk away. Your boundaries don't make you cold. They make you free.